Hey guys, this is Doug with Cold War Collectors, and today I'm going to be talking about different variations and basically types of the SSH-40 helmets. Now, the SSH-40 helmet was first developed in 1940 to replace the SSH-36, the SSH-38, and the SSH-39. Now, the SSH-40, the shell was based off the SSH-39. However, the liner system was completely different, and it was much easier to make due to the fact that they were approaching a wartime economy. Now, the wartime SSH-40s have cloth or sometimes real leather pads. Now, it has free pads for stabilization as well as a drawstring. This drawstring is some type of white cotton, and the chin strap is possibly some type of cloth. I'm not certain. This helmet was made in 1950. It's size 1. Made in the Leningrad Machine Works. Now, the thing that's important about these helmets were basically made up until the 1960s. I believe around 1956, from the first appearance of the East German M56 helmet, Soviet troops actually preferred the wide type of chin strap. Now, that later led to the SSH-40M. Same exact shell, but it had a wide chin strap. Instead of 2 braces for the chin strap, it had 4. Now, there was a very rare transitional type of it that was basically an SSH-40 that kept the hooks for the chin strap, but the chin strap was removed, and they added in 4 additional ones for the wide chin strap. Now, from what I've heard, the ones that are the 6th one, the ones that have 6 of these, the chin straps were made in East Germany. I'm not certain if the ones that were real basically the mass production SSH-40Ms, the ones that were their own independent model. I'm not certain if they had the chin straps made in East Germany. I assume they were made in the USSR, but I could be wrong. However, SSH-40s were issued to all branches of the Soviet military. 40Ms were only issued to motor infantry. In 1960, they decided to update the SSH-40 helmet. It kept the same shell design, however, the 2 rivets in the front were moved up higher, as well as the 2 rivets on the back. SSH-40s, 40Ms, the transitional 40 that later became a 40M, as well as the 60 and 68 all had 6 rivets. The SSH-39 had 3 rivets, and I will get into that later. Now, the SSH-60 was, from what I've heard, it was very well liked by troops, and it was easy to make. However, I believe they said it was not viewed as providing enough protection for the soldiers, so later on they started making the SSH-68. It was called the cone head or the egg head, mainly because it no longer had this type of shape to it. It had a higher top to it. Sometimes it was called a bell, as in the shape. And like the 60, it had the 2 rivets in the front higher, 2 rivets in the back higher, and it had the 2 rivets on the side in the same location, just like the SSH-60. Now, the 60 and 68 had 4 pads instead of 3 to increase stability. From the 60s and 68s I've seen, most of them have black pads. I've only seen a few 60s with brown pads. I've seen about almost half of the 68s with brown pads, and I've seen like 2 or 3 with white cloth pads, which I'm not certain about those. Most of the ones I've seen with the white cloth pads were made between 1981 and 1989. I think I might have seen one from 1990, but I'm not certain, unless it could have been a possible post-Soviet refurb. Now, the thing that's important, the Ukrainians started refurbing a lot of helmets, mainly 68s, and I believe they made some up until 94, but they're somewhat uncommon to find. So that basically covers the Soviet helmets. I'm not going to talk about the STSH-81 because that's not an SSH-40 variant. So basically, I'm just going to talk about another type of helmet that was a branch off of the SSH-40 helmet. Now, the SSH-39 was the original predecessor to the 40. However, it had 3 rivets, and it had a liner that looked somewhat like a German M33 liner, but it was completely different other than that. And some of them had the SSH-36 liner, which was basically a bunch of Basically, it looked somewhat like a donut. That's how I can describe it, because it's actually quite hard to describe what it looks like to you who haven't seen it. But I assume some of you might have seen it. Now, what happens is the Czechoslovaks, once they became socialists, started purchasing, from what I believe, I'm not certain if they started purchasing or if they started receiving Ssh-40 shells. Now, the thing that's important, they took the liners out, but they kept the 6 rivets in, and they added in 3 rivets, and from what I've heard, some of them used legitimate German M33 liners. However, these are the VZ-53s, and they're extremely hard to find. VZ-53s were a Czech-Soviet hybrid. Later on, they were just not really. They just were. It was just kind of more of a hassle to import helmets and then add liners into it. So then they phased out the VZ-53s and started making the VZ-52s and started making the VZ-53s. Now the VZ-53 got rid of the 6 bottom rivets and kept the top free. It had its own type of liner. Some of them you can see have, most of them have gray, like a gray type of wool with some type of rivets that would hold this in place. You could also tighten it and loosen it. Some of them had a drawstring that would also help with it. All of them have a metal band that basically reinforces it. All the ones I've seen, I have one that has the Soviet 1950s canvas replacement chin strap that's on backwards, because the Soviet SSH-39, the 40, they had the... I'll show you what I mean by this. The buckle, if you have it on your head, it's on the right side. The Czechoslovaks have the buckle on the left side of your head. So basically, it was this type of buckle, but it was reversed. So it was put on this side. It didn't have the sliding loop, and it was white canvas. It was a replacement one, which is quite interesting. I'm not digging through the collection to show you right now, but I'll probably post a picture of it in the description just so I can show you guys what I mean by it. So basically, they started making these helmets very late in 52, and they started mass producing them in 53. Now, these helmets, these helmets are usually advertised as Soviet World War II ones, but they're completely different because they're very different from the 40. Most of them have been painted over multiple times because the one I had was made in 50. This one was made in 50, very late 53, and used, I believe, at the latest until 1980, because it has one date in here that has Salvo, which I'm assuming was the guy's last name, 5/8/1980. It also has a few other names on it, like Volkolmar and Rene. This one, I'm not certain if it was possibly used in the Bosnian conflict, or some other conflict, because this one I got from a bunch, I found it in a bunch of crates that had a bunch of Bosnian Croat names, but I don't know why Rene's in there, unless it's some type of a Czechoslovak name. But it sounds more of a French name, so it could have been, I don't know, just forget about that. So basically, Czechoslovakia had those helmets, and they also had, sorry about this, they also had this other updated variant of it called the VZ-5380, which basically had a nylon chin strap, but it kept the old type of liner, and it had someone that looked like a nylon shoestring, a white nylon shoestring. Now, the Czechoslovaks also had another type of VZ-53. However, basically, I'm going to show you what I mean by this. So basically, the SSH-40M had a wide chin strap based off the East German one. I'm not certain if the Czechs wanted to base the chin strap they had off the East German one, but basically, it has a peg here and a peg here that would have a leather chin strap that would form a Y. As far as I know, it was only issued to traffic controllers, but I could be wrong, because that's the only time I've actually seen it. I've only seen it used by traffic controllers, but I've seen them without the traffic controller. Basically, sometimes they would have a hood, sometimes it would have to be painted on, but I've seen some of them without any type of traffic controller markings. Then Hungary. Hungary had the M50, which was basically a direct copy of the SSH-40M, except it had a leather chin strap, and it had kind of like a buckle mechanism on it that would hold it in place. So it actually was a pretty well-fitting helmet. Now, they're really rare most of the time because they just weren't used that often. They were used in the 56 conflict and afterwards. Some of them were exported to various nations, but they're very hard to find. Now, some of the M50s have a sticker with a round on it. Sometimes they get advertised as North Korean helmets, but that's not the case because the sticker that they added on didn't really have the painted, like basically the paint on the sticker aged and discolored a lot, so it looks like it basically has a roundel, which, as some of you know, which all you know is a circle. It has a red star inside of it, and it had red, white, green on the outside, but the green would like discolor a lot, so it would look like blue. So some people thought it was North Korean, but that's not. It's just a very badly aged sticker on a VZ. Sorry, not VZ. M50. Now, I've seen some, which I'm really doubtful of, that were supposedly used in the Hungarian Revolution. Some of them have a sticker on it, which I highly doubt they do. However, I've seen some that seem legitimate that have a very poorly made sticker. Sometimes I've seen them painted, but just be wary of those most of the time because I think most of them are faked. They're legitimate M50s, but they have fake stickers on them, which they'll greatly increase the price. Then they started making the M70. The M70 had 4 rivets, one on the back side, one on the front, another one on the front, and another one there. Now you may be asking, why does it have this weird type of netting and white paper? I saw a picture of a Hungarian border guard during the Yugoslav conflict. They were not involved in it. They were just protecting Hungary from possible weapon smugglers because there was actually a lot of black market weapons coming in and out of Hungary during the Yugoslav wars. So basically they had to protect the borders. I just saw that picture a while back. I think it got deleted on my computer once it got a virus though. So unfortunately I can't show you guys it. Now it had a 4-pad system. I actually think this is probably one of the most comfortable padding systems in an Eastern European helmet, other than the East German M56 liner. Well, not the original one, but the M56-76. This one's actually very comfortable. Only problem, it's not that adjustable, which is the problem. So basically what happened, you'd have these 4 holes which you could put a string through. You could put them on the outer 2, you could put them on the closer 2, or you could put them on all 4. But it wasn't really that adjustable. Now, it's missing the middle part of the chin strap. Basically, it would have a hook that would go around this part, which was kind of like a quick release. And it'd have a buckle, which you could adjust the length of it, so you could have it really far out or closer. But oftentimes, a lot of the ones I've actually seen don't come with the middle part of the chin strap for some odd reason. Then, after the socialist era, they started making M90s, which is basically the exact same thing as the M70, but this has supposedly infrared paint on it, and the M90 doesn't have that. From what I've heard, I believe they said in a conflict, all Hungarian helmets, including the M50, would have a camouflage cover or they put mud on it, but I could be wrong about that. Now, there's another helmet I don't have with me right now. I don't have the Romanian SSH-40. Now, the Romanian SSH-40 was meant as a replacement for the older Romanian M39, which was a copy of the Dutch M34. Now, this was used during the RPR era, which is pre-Ceausescu. Now, it was also used in the early part of the Ceausescu era, but then it was replaced in 1973 by the M73 helmet, which was an updated version of the Romanian M39 helmet. Now, the other thing that's important about that, I'm not certain if they were exported. I really don't know if they were. That basically covers the Romanian SSH-40 variants. Sometimes they have parade stickers with the RPR symbol on them, but they're very rare. I've never actually seen one for sale. I've only seen one in a photo. Now, getting on to the next nation, Poland. Poland actually had a lot of different variants of SSH-40s. The first one was somewhat of a the first one they used legitimate Soviet SSH-40 helmets, and they used them by the First Polish Army, I believe, during World War II, and after that, in the early part of the Cold War. Then they wanted to try to upgrade the old WZ-31 helmet, which became the WZ-3150, which was somewhat of like a hybrid between the WZ-31 and the SSH-40, but then eventually it was replaced by the WZ-50, which was just cheaper to make. But it had it basically had a chin strap that looked like the Italian M33. It had the chin strap and the liner looked like the Italian M33. However, I'm going to demonstrate with a Czechoslovakia helmet because these helmets were somewhat similar on the liner. Basically, on the inside of this, it would have a rectangular square that would say WZ and the date. So some of them have KZWND, which was usually a factory marking. That's one of them. And it would have like 1952, 1950, the various dates. Then eventually they also started making with pig leather. I've also seen some WZ-50s made in 1971, but it's very strange. Because that's when the WZ-67 started being produced, which is the most common one. It's basically an SSH-40 that has, I'm going to demonstrate with the Czechoslovakia because it's actually closer to the Polish helmets than the Soviet ones. Now, this part of the dome was actually narrower and was pushed back a bit more. I'll show you a picture of it on the computer. No, never mind. I'll just link it in the description. So basically, it's very common to find these. Now what they do, it has a single rivet there as well. It only really has 2 rivets on the side, and it has some of an X liner with a circular liner that has, it's more of a rectangular, basically the points on the liner are somewhat rectangular, and they're held in with a chin, and they're held in with a string. I'll link photos of all the helmets in the description. So that's basically it. Then they started making the WZ-6775, and this one it looked very complicated, but basically it had the same shape as the WZ-67, except it had a lot of nylon that you could adjust the helmet liner. It looked really confusing, but it was very comfortable from what I've heard. And then that was replaced by the WZ-70, not officially because the WZ-70 started to come into production, but it never really replaced the other one. It had a very large rivet in the same place where the WZ-67 had a rivet. Then I've also seen what I believe is a plastic version of the WZ-70. I'm not certain what the actual name of it is, but I've seen UN marked ones, which I've also seen used by the Mexican army for some odd reason, because there was a guy in Mexico that was selling one that was used by the Mexican army, and he had pictures of it, which is very strange. I've seen Mexican copies of, basically Mexican plastic copies of USM-1 helmets, but some reason why there was a very odd occurrence of a Mexican using a plastic copy of a WZ-75 for some odd reason. Now, the other thing that's important is that East Germany barely used any helmets. I've seen some pictures of them using SSH-40s, but that's very early on. By 56 they were making all their helmets, and all the other foreign helmets they were using were basically just discarded or given to basically summer camps for people who would try to join the military. Sometimes VZ-53s would end up there, sometimes SSH-40s would. Now, the other important thing is North Korean helmets. They're basically the exact same thing as a Soviet SSH-40. They have 6 rivets, except they're made out of copper or zinc. The rivets are higher placed up. Plus, they believe the lining system is made out of canvas or cotton. They're not certain because they don't really want to ruin it. But basically what happens, it has the almost very similar stampings to the SSH-40 helmets. Now I'm going to demonstrate with the 40M. So basically on the 40M, it has a rectangular stamp that indicates what factory it was made out of, but below a line that has whatever size it was. So this one is size 1, ST meaning Stalingrad Tractor Factory, either 1958 or 1968 because it's kind of smudged. My 40 is made in 1950 in the Leningrad Machine Works. So basically what would happen, it would have size in Korean with a slash and 1, 2, or 3, depending on the size, and what year it was made. Sometimes I've seen them in Latin numbers, other times I've seen them in what could possibly be Korean, 2 Korean characters and then 2 Latin numbers. So I believe that's probably all. China also used very small amounts of SSH-40s, but then they were all phased out by the time they started making their own helmets. And the whole Sino-Soviet conflict, because they didn't want to be using those helmets anymore, plus it could cause friendly fire in case an actual conflict broke out. Vietnam used some, Cambodia, Laos. basically every single socialist nation used at least one type of Warsaw Pact helmet. The Albanians, for example, they only used SSH-40s and WZ-50s, and then they started using Chinese helmets. Yugoslavs, they used a very, very, very extremely small amount of SSH-40s, but I've never actually seen any of them for sale. I've only seen one picture of a Yugoslav with an SSH-40, and that could possibly be World War II or very early post-World War II. So I'm going to count that as World War II. I don't think the Yugoslavs actually used any SSH-40 helmets, but I could be wrong. Now, there were also a lot of other places that used different types of helmets. Currently, Afghanistan is using a whole bunch of different Warsaw Pact helmets. Originally, during the Soviet-Afghan War, they were only using Soviet helmets. The ones they were using were 40s, 40Ms, 60s, and 68s. Now, Hungary is giving them some helmets, and Romania is giving them some helmets. Obviously, not the SSH-40s. They're giving them the not WZs, M50, M73 helmets. So basically, almost every nation, every socialist nation or communist nation, has used one variation of a descendant of the SSH-40 helmet, and these helmets are still used. Sometimes there were even some of them used in the whole Crimean annexation by Russian naval infantry. I'm not certain if it was a 40 or a 60, but I saw this one picture when you can obviously tell it's either a 40 or a 60. It's not a 68 or a 40M, because the only people who were issued 40Ms were motor infantry. Nobody else was issued them. Sometimes they're advertised as para helmets, but that's just not true. Now, I'm also going to discuss this a little bit. MVD also used SSH-68s. Now, they have a star stamp in them, and sometimes they have sometimes they have the maker's mark and the size blotted out with a bunch of numbers on them, and that usually is like regimental markings, but that's not all the time. Most of the time, MVD and Oman helmets, they really vary from helmet to helmet, and they're pretty hard to find. So, I believe that's all. Thank you for watching, and subscribe.